And good morning. How are you doing out there? I see we have one person in the live broadcast. If you're here, go ahead and type in the chat bar and let me know you're here today. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming today. Who do we have in the chat bar? Anybody? Who we got? All right. I'm not sure. It may be me in the chat bar, actually. If you're in this broadcast, go ahead and type in real quick. Let me know you're here. Okay. 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 I'm not sure if anyone's here. Hello. If you're here, please type in the chat bar and let me know. I'm getting ready to cancel this broadcast if nobody's here. I'm in the live. Okay, long as we have somebody, that's all I need. Thank you, Hannah. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Oh my goodness. All right, good. As long as I got at least one person, I'm willing to go with this. All right. All right, Hannah, here we go. I'm not sure how to type in the chat bar. In order to type in the chat bar, you have to have signed in with your Gmail account. Once you sign in with your Gmail account, you can then add stuff to the chat bar. That's all. But that's completely fine. Okay, you know what? You can go ahead and text me your questions if you have any, Hannah Beach, just as long as we can communicate. That's all I really care about. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right, so your exam is now available in Blackboard. Your exam is due Sunday night by 11:59 p.m. and you're going to have to use the lockdown browser to do this. I see that you're just going to type in Remind, and that's completely cool with me, Hannah. As long as we're communicating, I don't care. So the exam is available, and it's due Sunday night by 11:59 p.m. Let's go ahead and go to the review sheet, shall we? Let me see. It's right here. Okay. Now, you should be able to see my computer screen in front of you. Hopefully, Hannah, can you see my computer screen? Can you, if you can see my computer screen, go ahead and type in the chat bar and let me know that you can see it. Okay? Fantastic. So, there's an important note for this exam, Hannah. Okay, fantastic. There's an important note for this exam. The first time you use the Respondus browser, you have to open it manually before the exam will work. Okay? So you have to use have you ever used the Respondus testing tool, the lockdown tool, Hannah? Hopefully you have. You have, so you're going to open it. Let's see, it's right up here. The link to the download is right up here. You download the app, and then there's instructions right here to download it. And then you have to open the Respondus browser and start the exam. Okay, cool. Yeah, so make sure, Hannah, that you go and download the browser from here, and then you have to install it. You already downloaded it? Fantastic. Just remember, before you access the exam, you actually have to open the lockdown browser, okay? Cool, and you watched the video. Wow. Okay, you're probably more prepared than me or most of the other students. Okay, cool. Sounds like you got it going on, Hannah. Thank you. All right, so we have 50 questions. Each of these questions is worth 2 points on your final grade. They're going to be a mix of multiple choice, matching, and true false questions. Okay, so I'm going to go over and it's going to cover the first 4 exams of your textbook. I'm going to go over quickly what I want you to know. If you'll go back, Hannah, and look at PowerPoint 1A, I talked about the fathers of psychology. There are three people who are important in the founding of psychology as a science back in the 1800s, Hannah. I want you to know what William James did, what Gustav Fechner did, and Gustav Fechner, Ernst Weber, and the first psychology lab, Wilhelm Wundt. I want you to know what each of those guys did. Wilhelm Wundt opened the first psychology laboratory, okay, and William James wrote the first textbook. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to have two multiple choice questions where I want you to know what each of those three fellows did, okay? So, Fechner was first to measure the mind. Wundt opened the first psychology lab, and William James wrote the first textbook. I'm going to ask you that. All right. Now, I do want you to know the definition of psychology. Also in PowerPoint 1A, there's a definitional question. Okay. There's a definition in 1A. I'm going to ask you to tell me what that definition is on the first exam. Now, the other thing I want you to know is that what differentiates psychology from philosophy is its reliance on measurement. It's scientific, okay? So there's two questions on psychology. One is to know the definition, and one is where you're going to demonstrate to me that you're aware that psychology is a science, okay? All right, now, Hannah, you were in the live webinar on Monday of last week, last Thursday's Monday, Chapter 1. If you remember when we were talking about Chapter 1 and 2, I talked to you about the subfields of psychology, Heather, or Hannah. I hope you remember that. So, in your textbook and in my PowerPoint, there's a chart that lists the subfields of psychology, the different areas of specialization. I'm going to ask you to know, to be able to describe what each of those subfields does, okay? Now, I'm not only going to ask you on the first exam, Hannah, but I am also going to ask you on every other exam and on the final exam. So I'm really interested in you knowing the subfields of psychology. This is actually going to turn out to be on the cumulative part of your exam. So just become aware of that and learn these really good for the first exam, okay? Now, in Chapter 1, I also talked about the different kinds of research methods, how an experiment was different from a correlation, and how a correlation was different from observational research. I've got two questions where I generally want you to know the difference between an experiment, a correlation, and a case study, okay? Hannah, I think that's going to be on Chapter 1B, the second day of Chapter 1. I talked about the three different broad research methods. I want you to know that, okay? Also, Hannah, there is a question on positive versus negative correlations. Hannah, do you know the difference between a positive correlation and a negative correlation? Okay, case study, and what was the third one? Correlation, case study, and experiments. Experiments, okay? So I'm going to, I want you to know the difference between a positive correlation and a negative correlation. So what I'm going to do on the exam is I'm going to describe a relationship between two variables, and you're going to tell me, does that represent a positive correlation or does that represent a negative correlation, okay? You know what, I'm sorry, this probably isn't big enough. Can you see? Hopefully you can see the screen, okay? So that's Chapter 1. Two questions on identifying the three fathers from the 1800s, Chapter 1A. The two questions on the definition of psychology, also Chapter 1A, PowerPoint 1A. And then the five subfields, I think that's also PowerPoint 1A as well. 2 questions on knowing the different research methods, and 1 question where you show me that you know the difference between a positive and negative correlation. That's 12 multiple choice questions. Any questions on chapter 1, Hannah? Since you're not typing in the chat bar, I'm going to assume no at this point, okay? Now, let's go on to chapter 2. Chapter 2 is also a chapter that's going to be on the cumulative exam. Over the course of this semester, I'm going to continue to ask you about parts of the brain. You are going to have to know what each of the parts of the brain does. There's a ton of parts of the brain in chapter 2, so it can seem a little overwhelming, but I promise you throughout the semester, we're going to keep coming back to these parts of the brain. So if you can remember what they do, Hannah, that will help you on the exam, okay? So, chapter 12, 13 questions, 12 multiple choice and 1 matching. Okay, now, I'm going to ask you to identify the functions of the following parts of the brain. I actually focused on 6 of them, and I'm going to go ahead and just tell you right here on the exam review which ones you need to know. You need to know what the fusiform gyrus does. You need to know what the cerebellum does. You need to know what the occipital lobe, the frontal lobe, the spinal column, and the corpus callosum. All right, Hannah? Now, if you remember last night, we talked about infant reflexes, and I reminded you that the spinal column is the part of your central nervous system that controls reflex responses. I'm going to ask you about that on the exam, Hannah, okay? I want you to know that the frontal lobe, right here, the frontal lobe, let's see, the frontal lobe, right here, Hannah, is responsible for reason, focus, problem solving, controlling your emotions, okay? I want you to know that the occipital lobe in the back of your brain, okay, is where your primary visual center is, okay? Your cerebellum is down in your base of your brain. It is in your brain stem, Hannah. Your cerebellum is responsible for allowing you to have a sense of balance and allowing you to walk smoothly. If you've ever seen somebody who's got one of those weird jerky walks, probably they have damage to their cerebellum, okay? Their cerebellum. And in your temporal lobe, there's this part of your brain called the fusiform gyrus. This fusiform gyrus allows you to recognize other people. Hannah, you ever notice how it's easy to recognize other people's faces, but you often forget their names? It's not because you're bad at names. It's because you have a special brain part that is great at remembering faces. That's your fusiform gyrus. And then I want you to know that the corpus callosum connects the left and right halves of your brain. Okay, Hannah? So I'm going to ask you, I've got 6 multiple choice questions. And on each of these multiple choice questions, I want you to be able to tell me what each of these brain parts does. Okay? Now, the anatomy and function of the neuron. So I'm going to ask you to know the different parts of the neuron and what they do. So you have to know what a dendrite is, what a cell body is, what an axon is, what a terminal button is, and what the myelin sheath is, okay? If you'll go, Hannah, to PowerPoint 2A, I go through and identify those parts of the neuron. I want you to know those. The dendrite, the cell body, the axon, the terminal button, and the myelin sheath, okay? Now, there is a matching question where I want you to match the basic neurotransmitters and what they do in your brain. If you look in PowerPoint 2A, there is a chart where I tell you what each of the most common neurotransmitters in your brain does. There's a matching question where you have to match those two things. All right? Now, there's one question on the general design of the brain. One of the things that I talked about in chapter 2 was brain modularity. Okay, Hannah? Brain modularity. This is the idea that your brain is not one machine, Hannah. Instead, your brain is a bunch of machines that have to work together. Okay? So imagine your brain as 100 different computers. And one of those computers is responsible for vision. One of those computers is responsible for hearing. One of those computers is responsible for keeping your heart beating. Okay, so each of those parts of your brain is a module that controls a certain part of your functioning. Modularity, that's one design principle. The other principle is connectivity, and I talk about this in chapter 2, okay? These modules are connected to each other so that they can communicate. I talk about this in chapter 2 and I talk about it in chapter 3, Hannah. I want you to understand that the brain is a bunch of individual modules that each control a certain part of your functioning. Now, why is this interesting, Hannah? And I'm going to show you this next week when we do get into webinar, Hannah. You can destroy a part of the brain and weird things happen to people's behavior. They don't lose all of their vision, they'll lose part of their vision. They won't lose all of their senses, just one of their senses. And I'm going to show you this modularity concept with some brain damage victims next week. Okay? Do you understand what I mean when I'm talking about modularity and connectivity, Hannah? If you do, go ahead and type in the chat in your remind and let me know. Okay? So these are the 13 questions from chapter 2. I want you to know 16 parts of the brain, 6 parts of the brain, and I want you to know the 5 parts of the neuron, and I want you to know what the basic neurotransmitters do. Okay, that's chapter 2. All right, chapter 3 is on consciousness, sleeping and consciousness. Okay, there are 13 questions. 11 of them are going to be multiple choice, and I have 2 true-false questions. Okay. There is one general question about consciousness. If you look in PowerPoint 3A, I start off on the first slide by defining what consciousness involves. I'm going to ask you to know that definition on the chapter. Go ahead and look at it, chapter 3A. Okay? Now, I described 2 demonstrations of how consciousness is limited, Hannah. Those 2 things are change blindness and inattentional blindness. It turns out that if human beings aren't focused on something, if they aren't told to look for something, a lot of times they are blind to it. People are blind when things don't notice when things change in their environment. We call that change blindness. And sometimes if people aren't asked to pay attention to something, they won't even notice it. That's called inattentional blindness. I've got one question where I'm going to give you a description and I want you to know if it's change blindness I'm describing or is it inattentional blindness that I am describing. Okay? Now, in chapter 3, in 3A, I talked about the different types of consciousness. I talked about hypnotism, meditation, and flow as 3 altered states of consciousness. Basically, I'm going to give you general definitions on the exam, and I want you to know how hypnosis is different than meditation and how these are both different than flow. So I described different kinds of consciousness. Hannah, I described meditation, I described hypnosis, and I described flow. These are 3 ways in which our consciousness changes. I have two general questions where I want you to be able to identify these three altered states of consciousness. Okay? Now, as I told you 5 minutes ago in chapter 2, I love brain areas, and we're going to be doing brain areas for the entire semester. I introduced two brain areas responsible for sleep in my lecture on sleeping and waking. I want you to know what the suprachiasmatic nucleus does, the SCN, and I want you to know what the pons does. Okay? The circadian rhythm. Yes, absolutely. Good job, Hannah. You do know. The suprachiasmatic nucleus gives you a 24-hour cycle of sleeping, waking. And more importantly than that, it connects to your eyeballs and attaches your sleeping and waking cycle to the sun, too. Okay? So you're very good. I'm glad you knew that. It gives you your circadian rhythm. If you destroy your suprachiasmatic nucleus, you will actually not have a 24-hour cycle of sleeping and waking anymore. Okay? And then your pons releases melatonin at night, okay, to help you go to sleep, and it controls your body, paralyzes your body while you're dreaming so you don't thrash around and kick people, okay? Now, on chapter 3B, I went and talked about the different stages of sleep. I want you to know broadly, Hannah, what happens in REM sleep. We dream, okay? Which type of sleep do we spend the most time in? Light sleep, stage 2, okay? And what stage are we hardest to wake up? And that is stage 3 and 4, or delta sleep, deep sleep, okay? I want you to know that. I also want you to know, Hannah, by the way, stick this in your hat and keep this in mind, because I always ask this question. A lot of students think that people sleepwalk and sleep talk because they're dreaming. It actually turns out that you do not sleepwalk or sleep talk while you're dreaming. You actually sleep talk and sleepwalk in stage 3. I always ask that on the exam because it fools students, okay, Hannah? So I want you to know we do not sleepwalk and sleep talk in REM sleep. We sleepwalk and sleep talk in stage 3, okay? Now, in your chapter 3B, I also talk about different sleep disorders. I want you to know what sleep apnea is. I want you to know what narcolepsy is. REM sleep is when you dream. That's different than stage 3 and 4, okay? So stage 3 and 4, your brain is actually really, really slowed down and sleepy. But in REM sleep, your brain is actually just as awake as if you were walking around in class, okay? So just know that stage 3 is different than REM sleep, okay? Hannah, stage 3, your brain is really, really slowed down. But in REM sleep, your brain wakes back up, but you're still asleep, okay? Now, I want you to know the difference between sleep apnea, okay? So you have a blockage in your breath, in your throat, and you can't get enough air, and that causes you to wake up 100 times a night, Hannah. And when you wake up during the day, you're super duper sleepy. People with narcolepsy, their brain, they don't cycle through the stages well at night. And so during the day, they'll fall into REM sleep. So a person will be walking around and they'll immediately fall into dream sleep and fall over. That's narcolepsy. And then, like I said, my third question, I'm going to ask you where sleepwalking and sleep talking has, Hannah, and I want you to remember that sleepwalking and sleep talking happen in delta sleep, okay? And finally, Hannah, I want you to know that they use an EEG machine, an electroencephalogram, to study sleep. I'm going to ask you to know that particular sleep research tool, Okay. I see we have a second person joining the broadcast. If you're on the broadcast and want to say hello, go ahead and type in the chat bar, or you can send me a remind text just like Hannah's doing. Okay. But thanks for coming here today. Hannah, do you have any questions on chapter 3? Any questions on chapter 3? I'm going to hold on just a second and see if you have one. Okay, good deal. Good deal. All right, fantastic. All right, let's go to chapter 4. Chapter 4, 12 questions. 7 of them are going to be multiple choice. 7 are going to be multiple choice. 3 are going to be true, false, and there are 2 matching. Okay? So, I have one question on why developmental psychology is important. If you look in slide 4A, I basically tell you that learning about how human beings develop allows us to help people live longer, better lives, Hannah. Okay, so developmental psychology helps human beings live better and live longer. Okay, now I then have 2 questions on Erik Erikson. Okay, in your book, I talk about his theory of personality development. Erik Erikson, Hannah, says that human beings have 8 crises in their lives. Now, don't think of it as crises. When you and I use the word crises, we think about emergencies. These actually weren't emergencies, but these were like problems that people have to resolve. And he argued that there were 7 different problems or life lessons that we all have to learn. And he argued that we have to learn these lessons at different times in our life. So there's a lesson you have to learn the first year of your life. There's a lesson you have to learn when you're 2 and 3 years old. There's a lesson you have to learn from 4 to 6 years of age. And he talks about each of these crises, Hannah. What I want you to know is that he argues that human beings have normal crises, normal problems that occur, and that we have 7 of these that occur at typical times in our life. Okay? Excuse me, 8 crises. I'm sorry, I said 7. I'm sorry, Hannah. I am Mr. Typo. I am Mr. Typo. 8 crises. I'm forgetting on the last one. Okay, so these crises. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is to match the crises with the age group, and I'll give you a hint since you're here looking at the review, Hannah. I think I asked you about the identity crisis. So I assume you're 17 or 18, Hannah. You, as a teenager, are involved in the identity crisis. Okay, right now, you, Hannah, are trying to figure out who you are as a person. Okay, so you're in that crisis. I am in as a middle-aged man, I'm in the generativity crisis. I'm trying to learn how to build a better world for the people that come after me. I'm interested in building a legacy. Okay, so I want you to know one general question: crises aren't bad. I think that may even be a true-false question. And I want you to know that you, as a young adult, are dealing with the identity crisis. Okay. Now, in chapter 4, I talked about Harry Harlow's monkey and the attachment. Yep, identity versus role confusion. Absolutely, Hannah. Yep. You have to figure out how to fit into this great tapestry of modern adult society. What role do you play? So, who are you professionally? Who are you personally? Who are you sexually? Who are you politically? You have to figure out all of these questions when you're a teenager. And that's why growing up and being a teenager can be so tough. You're trying to figure out who you are. Great idea, Hannah. I'm glad to see you are familiar with some of this stuff. Okay. Now, I have two questions about Harry's, Harlow's monkeys, and attachment. Remember this, Hannah. What Harry Harlow showed with his monkeys was that monkeys bond to their mother out of love, not because they are hungry. That was the most important point from his study. Why do human beings attach to their mother? People used to say it was because their mother feeds their baby. Harry Harlow showed that there's something more important than just food. Babies attach to their parents because their parents make them feel comfortable and safe. Okay, I want you to know that. And then I'm going to give you a question where I want you to tell me which attachment style this child is demonstrating. So if you look in, I think it's in chapter 4B, we talked about the different attachment styles that Mary Ainsworth discovered. I'm going to give you a description and I want you to tell me whether or not that kid is a secure child, whether or not that is an anxious child, or whether or not that is an avoidant child, okay? So go look at the descriptions in 4B and know that I'm going to describe one of those and I want you to tell me which one I'm talking about, okay? Now, we also talked about prenatal development and having a healthy baby. I want you to know that low birth weight is one of the more risky outcomes that can happen to your baby. Okay, and these children are going to have difficulty in school. They're more likely to have learning disorders and some behavioral problems. So I want you to know that low birth weight is a big problem. This is why your doctors are really worried about teen mothers, because teen mothers are more likely to give birth to low birth weight babies. And there are definitely some bad outcomes associated, or possible bad outcomes associated with low birth weight, okay? Now, actually going back to the first slide of chapter 4A, okay? And I should have probably put this first, but I didn't. Hannah, on the first slide, or second slide maybe, I suggested to you that developmental psychologists study how human beings develop in 3 different areas. How our bodies change, which is biological development, how our minds change, which is cognitive development, and how our personalities change, which is called socio-emotional development. So what I'm going to do on the exam is I'm going to say something like, Dr. Smith is interested in how children's personalities change as they grow older. Which domain of development? Yes, Hannah. Which domain of development? So if I'm interested in how people's nervous system develops as they grow older, which domain of development am I interested in, Hannah? If I'm interested in how your brain matures, which part of development am I interested in? Cognitive, socio-emotional, or biological? If I'm interested in how your brain matures, which development? I don't know if that makes sense. That is the physical, absolutely. Yes, Hannah, correct. Fantastic. All right, last night, yep, that would be biological or physical. All right. Now, I think you were in webinar last night, Hannah. I talked about critical periods. It is physical. It is physical. Now, remember last night, Hannah, I suggested to you that a critical period is a time in your brain's development when a part of your brain needs to be stimulated in order for an ability to grow normally. And we even talked about the people who weren't exposed to language. We talked about Jeannie the wild child. She didn't hear language for the first 11 years of her life. And so her brain area that processed language changed and it didn't develop normally. And so she couldn't learn how to speak. I want you to know that your brain has critical periods when certain abilities have to be stimulated in order to grow normally. Okay. Now, there's one question on the prenatal stages of development. I want you to know that in the germinal stage, the fertilized egg cell implants in the uterine wall. I want you to know from 2 to 8 weeks, you're in the embryonic stage, and all of your organs begin developing in the embryonic stage. And then I want you to know from 8 weeks until you're born, you're in the fetal stage, and most of your size gain occurs there. Okay, so germinal, implant in the uterine wall, embryonic, organs start to grow, fetal period, most weight gain. All right, I'm going to ask you to match what happens with each of the prenatal stages. And I'll be honest, Hannah, I usually ask about the embryonic stage. I want everybody to know that all of your organs begin developing in the first month and a half of your life. Okay? Now, Hannah, cognitive changes in adulthood. This is actually, I think, in the end of PowerPoint 4A. One of the things that I want you to know is as you get older, you lose some of your mental abilities, Hannah. What do you lose? You do not lose your knowledge, Hannah, okay? You do not lose your knowledge. We'll call that crystallized intelligence. Instead, you lose your ability to think flexibly and the speed at which you can think. We call that your fluid intelligence. So if you go look in PowerPoint 4A, Hannah, in the last slide, there's going to be a slide and it talks about crystallized intelligence and fluid intelligence. And what happens when you get my age, Hannah, is you don't forget the facts you learned in school. Okay, my crystallized intelligence is going to stay intact for a long time. What's going to happen is I'm going to lose my ability to be creative and the speed at which I can think, Hannah. Okay? All right, Hannah? Now, the next thing, discriminate between object permanence and object self-awareness. Hannah, during the first 2 years of your life, you are not really self-aware. There are some very important things you have to learn. One of them is that objects exist even if you don't see them. Hannah, I know you can't see your car right now, but you probably know that your car exists. That is because you have object permanence. The second thing you have to learn during the first 2 years of your life is what we call objective self-awareness. When you look, exactly. Hannah, and the second thing you have to learn during the first year of life is when you look in a mirror, you are looking at yourself. You have objective self-awareness. It turns out before about 14 or 15 months, children don't seem to recognize themselves in the mirror. They think they're looking at another person, okay? And so these two skills will develop during the first year of life, okay? I'm going to give you one question describing one of these two, and I want you to tell me, am I talking about object permanence and or am I talking about objective self-awareness? And then finally, last question. Hannah, I just want you to know that children have a vocabulary explosion between 18 and 24 months of age. You say your first word usually around 12 or 13 months of age, and then you're going to pick up 1 or 2 words occasionally until you reach about 18 months of age. And starting around 18 to 20 months, all of a sudden, you're just going to start learning tons and tons of words. This happens to all children, and so it's called, we have a name for it. Developmental psychologists call it the language explosion. Okay? All right, Hannah. Those are the 50 questions that are going to be on the exam. Remember, you have to use the lockdown browser. No notes or books allowed. You have 60 minutes to do this exam, and you need to finish this exam by Sunday night at 11:59 p.m. All right, cool. Hannah, I'm going to go ahead and log off now. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate to send me a text. You're really good about that, and I'm always happy to answer your text, Hannah. So have a great weekend. If you have any problems, don't hesitate to get in touch with me, okay? Take care and have a great day. Bye.